I am Julian, 31 years old. Just a few months ago, I was standing on the front porch of my very first home, holding a thick manila envelope containing a lawsuit filed by my own parents. They were taking me to court, demanding I hand over the deed to my $850,000 house, plus pay them $420,000 in backdated child-rearing expenses. While I was standing there, staring at a legal document trying to strip away everything I had built with my own two hands, my parents told me straight to my face, "That house should go to your brother. He is struggling and you can just buy another one." They laughed at my hard work and humiliated me in front of our entire extended family, calling me a selfish, greedy corporate sellout who had forgotten where he came from. But there is one thing they did not know. I had quietly hired a forensic accountant and a top-tier litigation lawyer, uncovering decades of hidden assets, massive tax evasion, and interstate wire fraud. And now, they are the ones crying in a cramped apartment, begging me to save them from a federal prison sentence. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how I brought my own family to their knees using the very legal system they tried to use against me, please hit that like button if you believe in true justice. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments section down below. Now, let us go back to where this absolute nightmare really began. The day my life permanently changed started out as the proudest day of my existence. It was a normal Tuesday in early autumn. I had just closed on my dream home in Riverside Heights. If you know anything about real estate, you know Riverside Heights is the kind of neighborhood where doctors, senior partners at law firms, and successful business owners live. It features wide, tree-lined streets, perfectly manicured lawns, and custom-built homes that have actual character instead of looking like cookie-cutter suburban boxes. I had paid $850,000 for the property, which was actually a steal in the current real estate market. I put down exactly $170,000 in cash to avoid private mortgage insurance, securing a beautiful 20% down payment, and locked in a 2.8% fixed-rate mortgage. My credit score was sitting at a pristine 798, and my debt-to-income ratio made the loan approval process a complete breeze. I was exhausted. I was wearing a sweat-stained gray t-shirt and old jeans, breaking down heavy cardboard moving boxes in my massive new living room. The smell of fresh paint and polished hardwood floors filled the air. For the first time in my 31 years on this earth, I felt entirely safe. I felt like I had finally outrun the ghost of my childhood. Then the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, piercing chime that echoed through the high ceilings of the foyer. I expected it to be a package delivery or maybe a neighbor coming over to introduce themselves. I wiped the sweat from my forehead, walked across the pristine floorboards, and opened my custom mahogany front door. Standing on my porch was a woman in a sharp gray business suit. She did not look like a neighbor. She held a heavy clipboard and wore an expression of complete professional detachment. She looked at me, glanced down at the top sheet of paper on her clipboard, and asked if I was Julian. I nodded, entirely unsuspecting. The moment the confirmation left my lips, she shoved a heavy, thick stack of legal papers directly into my chest. I instinctively brought my arms up to catch the heavy document. She stated clearly that I was being served, turned around without another word, and walked briskly back to a nondescript sedan parked at the curb. I stood there in the warm afternoon sun, the heavy paper weighing down my hands like a lead block. The document was 47 pages long. The bold black letters at the top of the first page stated the plaintiffs in the civil suit: Richard and Margaret, my father and my mother. I was listed directly below them as the sole defendant. I flipped through the crisp white pages, my vision literally blurring. My heart started hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack my sternum. I walked back into my kitchen, dropped the massive stack of papers onto the cool granite island, and just stared at them. I had to force myself to breathe. I began to read the claims. Count 1 was a demand for $420,000 in what they called educational investments and childhood rearing expenses. They were legally claiming that I owed them for the basic cost of keeping me alive, fed, and housed when I was a minor. Count 2 stated that my older brother, Sebastian, was economically disadvantaged due to the current financial climate affecting social media entrepreneurs. Therefore, they argued, I had a legal and moral obligation to provide him with stable housing to ensure the survival of the family unit. Count 3 was the most unhinged demand of all. The lawsuit formally demanded that the deed to my newly purchased real estate be transferred immediately to Sebastian, while I would be mandated by the court to continue paying the monthly mortgage for 36 months as a form of emotional damages for the distress my selfishness had caused the family. They wanted to take the house I bought with my own salary, from my own savings. They wanted to give it to a 33-year-old man who had not held a legitimate W-2 job in 5 years. They actually found a lawyer willing to draft this pure, unadulterated fantasy and file it in a court of law. I want to fast forward just for a moment to the morning of the trial, so you can understand the sheer magnitude of what was at stake. I walked up the wide concrete steps of the county courthouse. The air was biting and cold, the sky a bruised purple before the dawn fully broke. I wore my best tailored navy blue suit, the kind you wear when you are closing a $10 million commercial lease. I was carrying 2 heavy leather briefcases. Inside those cases was not just my legal defense. It was a weapon of mass financial destruction. I felt like a federal prosecutor walking in to dismantle a dangerous crime syndicate, except the syndicate was my own flesh and blood. I pushed through the heavy oak double doors of the courtroom. The distinct smell of industrial floor wax and old, polished wood hit my senses. I looked across the center aisle. My parents were sitting there at the plaintiff's table, flanked by my Aunt Beatrice and a half-dozen other relatives who had come to watch my downfall. They were dressed in coordinated dark colors, navy blues and blacks, looking like they were attending a funeral instead of a civil property dispute. Sebastian was sitting right next to my mother. He was holding a thick manila folder filled with interior design printouts he had clipped from Pinterest. He had literally brought home decoration ideas to a court of law, fully expecting the judge to hand him the keys to my house by noon. They looked at me with smug, unshakable confidence. They expected me to fold under the pressure of the family dynamic. They expected me to surrender. But to understand why I did not surrender, and why I was completely prepared to legally annihilate the people who brought me into this world, you have to understand exactly what they took from me in the first place. I thought the worst of their abuse was over when I finally moved out at 18. I was so incredibly wrong. Growing up in our house meant understanding a very clear, heavily enforced, and entirely unspoken hierarchy. Sebastian was the golden child. He was the prince who could do absolutely no wrong, the fragile genius who needed to be protected from the harsh realities of the world. I was the spare part. I was the designated family scapegoat, the one expected to blend into the wallpaper, ask for nothing, and figure life out entirely on my own. My father was a middle manager at a regional insurance firm. He made a decent, stable living, bringing home roughly $75,000 a year. My mother worked part-time as a dental hygienist, working 3 days a week and bringing in another $35,000. We were firmly middle class. There was money for nice family vacations to Florida, money for name-brand clothes, and money for a comfortable life in the suburbs. But somehow, all of that disposable income only flowed in one specific direction. Sebastian received private piano lessons at $80 an hour. He got expensive art classes, top-tier summer sports camps, and brand new electronics every single Christmas. When his high school grades inevitably slipped because he refused to do his homework, my parents immediately hired private tutors to help him pass. They blamed the teachers for not understanding his creative learning style. When my grades slipped even slightly, I was grounded for a month and told to stop being lazy and figure it out myself. I was told to go play outside and stay out of the way. I spent my entire childhood living in a cramped, drafty room down in the unfinished basement. It flooded every single spring when the snow melted, soaking the cheap rug on the concrete floor. The air down there always smelled faintly of mildew and dust from the furnace. Sebastian, meanwhile, occupied the massive master suite upstairs because my mother insisted he needed the extra square footage and natural light for his creative energy and mental well-being. The contrast between us became entirely impossible to ignore when we reached high school. I vividly remember the summer I turned 16. I was highly motivated to get into a good college, and I wanted to take the SATs early. I needed exactly $60 for the standard registration fee. I asked my father for the money one evening at the dinner table. He did not even look up from his plate. He took a sip of his water and told me that money was currently very tight. He said I needed to learn the value of a hard-earned dollar and that I should figure out how to fund my own academic pursuits. The very next morning, I woke up at 5, walked 2 miles down to a local commercial construction site, and begged the site foreman for any job he had available. I spent that entire summer working in 100-degree heat, hauling heavy roofing shingles up ladders and mixing wet concrete for $12 an hour. I came home every single night with my hands blistered, my back screaming in pain, and my clothes soaked in sweat and dust. I paid for my own SAT registration. I bought my own back-to-school clothes from the clearance racks at Walmart. I started saving every single penny I earned in a locked metal cash box hidden under my basement bed. 2 years later, Sebastian turned 18. Remember how money was supposedly tight? Remember how I needed to learn the value of a dollar? I came home from a weekend shift at a local diner, smelling like deep fryer grease and bleach, to find a massive surprise sitting in our driveway. It was a brand new Porsche, a bright silver, pristine luxury vehicle with a giant red bow on the hood. My parents had gone to the dealership and financed it as a surprise for his 18th birthday. My mother was hugging him, crying tears of absolute joy, loudly proclaiming that a future successful entrepreneur needed a reliable, high-status vehicle to build his professional network and commute to college. I stood on the cracked sidewalk in my stained diner uniform, watching them pop a bottle of champagne to celebrate. I did not yell. I did not throw a tantrum. I did not even cry. I just felt this cold, hard, heavy knot form deep in the pit of my stomach. I realized right then, with absolute crystal clarity, that nobody in this family was ever going to save me. There was no secret college fund waiting for me. There was no inheritance. There was no safety net. If I wanted to survive in this world, I had to become completely and utterly undeniable. I took all of that bitter resentment and channeled it into pure, unadulterated motivation. While Sebastian went off to an expensive private liberal arts college in California to get a useless communication degree, my parents draining $160,000 from their savings and retirement accounts to pay his tuition, I took a different path. I enrolled in a local state school to study finance. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously. I waited tables at night, I ran the cash register at the campus bookstore between classes, and I continued working grueling construction gigs on the weekends. I pulled all-nighters fueled by cheap coffee and sheer willpower, maintaining a 3.8 GPA. During my junior year, I studied for and obtained my state real estate license. I started flipping small commercial contracts on my weekends off, making tiny commissions that slowly began to snowball. I graduated with honors and absolutely zero student loan debt. I jumped straight into the brutal, high-stakes world of commercial real estate investment. I started at the very bottom of a prestigious firm. I was the coffee runner, the copy guy, the kid doing the mind-numbing grunt work the senior partners refused to touch. But I ground my teeth, worked 80-hour weeks, and slowly started closing my own deals. By the time I hit 30, I had clawed my way up the corporate ladder. Last year, I cleared $180,000 in base salary plus massive performance bonuses. This year, I am tracking toward $220,000. And what about the golden child? What about Sebastian? After blowing through his massive college fund and taking an extra 2 years living in expensive California apartments to find himself, he moved right back into my parents' house. Specifically, he moved into the basement, the exact same basement I had lived in. Except now, my parents had fully finished it, outfitting it with high-end gaming equipment, acoustic panels, and expensive studio lighting. He decided he was not meant for the corporate grind. He was going to be a social media influencer. For the past 5 years, he has been posting highly edited photos of expensive lattes, stealing motivational quotes from Pinterest, and constantly complaining about the toxic capitalist machine. He makes maybe $800 a month from occasional, highly questionable dietary supplement sponsorships. He still drives that aging silver Porsche, the maintenance paid for by my father, and my mother still does his laundry and makes his sandwiches. So, when I finally hit my long-term financial goals, I decided to pull the trigger on the dream I had been saving for. I bought the house in Riverside Heights. The day I got the keys, I stood in front of the beautiful brick facade, took a smiling selfie holding the keys up to the camera, and posted it on Facebook. I wrote a simple caption about how hard work and sleepless nights finally pay off. The post blew up. I got over 200 likes and dozens of comments from old college friends, colleagues, and even some of the guys I used to work construction with. People were genuinely thrilled for me because they knew exactly how much blood and sweat it took for me to get there. My parents did not like the post. They did not leave a comment. They offered no congratulations. 3 days later, my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed my father's name. I answered, expecting a delayed congratulations. Instead, his voice was completely flat, devoid of any warmth or parental pride. "Julian," he said sharply, "we need to have a family meeting about this housing situation immediately." I was genuinely confused by my father's tone on the phone. "The housing situation?" I repeated. I honestly thought maybe they wanted to come over to see the place, or perhaps my mother wanted to assert her dominance by criticizing my choice of neighborhood. I agreed to drive over to their house that evening after work. I pulled my car up to the curb of my childhood home. The aging silver Porsche was parked in the driveway, taking up the prime spot. I walked up the pathway, turned the knob, and stepped right into a carefully orchestrated ambush. It felt like walking onto the set of a terrible daytime television drama. My parents were sitting side by side on the floral living room sofa, their arms crossed over their chests, presenting a solid, united front. Sebastian was slouched in a leather recliner directly across from them. He looked thoroughly bored, scrolling through his phone, but carrying this sickening, heavy aura of entitlement. Right in the center of the room, positioned directly in front of them, was a single empty wooden dining chair. It was placed there specifically for me. I was walking into a family court-martial. "Sit down, Julian," my father ordered, gesturing to the empty wooden chair. I remained standing near the entryway, keeping my distance. "I am fine standing. What is going on? Is somebody sick? Did someone die?" My mother let out a long, dramatic sigh, shaking her head as if my very presence was a massive disappointment. "We have been discussing your new purchase, Julian. Your father and I have been talking, and we feel that you have made a very selfish, very hasty decision." I actually laughed out loud. It was an involuntary bark of pure disbelief. I thought they were pulling some kind of bizarre prank. Selfish? I bought a house. With my own money. What on earth are you talking about? My father leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, adopting his best authoritative management voice. "You are making a massive salary now at that firm. You are single. You have no dependents. You do not need a massive 4-bedroom estate in a luxury neighborhood. Your brother is struggling. He is a creative entrepreneur trying to build a brand in a terrible economy that does not support independent artists. We think it is only fair and right that you sign the deed of the house over to Sebastian. He needs the space for his content studio. You can easily afford to buy another, smaller apartment for yourself." The silence in the room became thick and deafening. I looked at my mother. She nodded in solemn agreement, her eyes pleading with me to just comply. I looked at Sebastian. He finally put his phone down. He actually had the absolute nerve to look me dead in the eye and speak. "Honestly, Julian," Sebastian drawled, picking at a spot on his expensive designer jeans, "I have always dreamed of a house in Riverside Heights. I deserve it more than you do. I have been through so much emotional trauma trying to build my personal brand and establish myself as an influencer. You sold your soul to the corporate world. You have a steady paycheck handed to you every 2 weeks. You have absolutely no idea the struggle I go through. It is just not fair that you get to live in luxury while I am stuck in a basement trying to make ends meet." My vision literally went red. The blood roared in my ears. This man, who had never worked a hard physical day in his entire life, who had his massive college tuition paid for in cash, who was driving a luxury Porsche bought by our parents, was sitting in a recliner telling me I had everything handed to me. I gripped the back of the empty wooden chair so hard my knuckles turned completely white. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a dangerously low register. "You are all completely out of your minds," I said, spacing every word out clearly. "I worked roofing construction in the blazing heat while you got a sports car. I paid for my own education while you blew a fortune. I lived on ramen noodles to save my down payment. I am not giving anyone a single square foot of my property. You can all go to hell." I turned on my heel and walked rapidly toward the front door. My father jumped up from the sofa and chased me into the hallway. "This conversation is not over, Julian," he screamed, his face turning a deep, angry shade of purple. "Family takes care of family. You owe us for raising you." I slammed the heavy front door behind me so hard the decorative glass panes rattled violently in their wooden frames. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove away, my hands physically shaking on the steering wheel. I thought that was the end of it. I thought they would just be furious, give me the silent treatment for a few months, and eventually give up. I did not realize they were already planning a full-scale war. The lawsuit arrived 2 weeks later, but before the legal papers were even drafted by their attorney, the psychological warfare began in earnest. When you cut off highly toxic, entitled family members, they rarely go quietly into the night. They have to control the public narrative. They have to make you the ultimate villain, because if they do not, they have to face the incredibly ugly reality of their own failures. Sebastian immediately went into full victim mode on social media. He started a daily video series on TikTok titled, "My Brother Stole My Future." He sat in his basement studio, setting up dramatic ring lights, and filmed himself performing the ugliest, most manipulative fake crying I have ever seen. He talked at length about how he had already picked out the furniture for his dream home, and how his greedy, soulless, corporate younger brother had manipulated the legal system to steal the property out from under him. Because people on the internet absolutely love a dramatic train wreck, the videos started getting real traction. He gained thousands of followers in a matter of days, mostly middle-aged women and automated bot accounts, who flooded his comment section with intense sympathy and outrage. He even took it a step further and created a GoFundMe page titled, "Help Me Fight for My Family Home." He brazenly claimed he needed $30,000 for emergency legal fees to fight a predatory real estate scam that left him homeless. He actually managed to raise over $800, mostly from our distant, gullible relatives. Then came my Aunt Beatrice, my father's sister. She has always been the chief family gossip, the miserable woman who sits at Thanksgiving dinners judging everyone else's life choices while her own life is a complete disaster. She gladly accepted the role of their chief flying monkey. Aunt Beatrice started systematically commenting on every single Facebook post I had ever made dating back 10 years, calling me an ungrateful monster, a thief, and a sociopath. She wrote massive paragraphs about how my mother cried herself to sleep every night because of my unthinkable cruelty. But she crossed a massive, unforgivable line when she tracked down the main phone number for my commercial real estate firm. I was sitting in a high-stakes, tense meeting regarding a multi-million-dollar commercial lease when my boss, Mr. Henderson, abruptly pulled me out of the conference room. Mr. Henderson is a no-nonsense, highly respected guy in his late 50s who has seen every dirty trick in the business book. "Julian," he said gravely, handing me a small yellow slip of paper with a phone number scribbled on it. "I just got off the phone with a woman claiming to be your aunt. She screamed at my receptionist, demanded to speak to me, and then told me you are mentally unstable. She claimed you are involved in massive real estate fraud, and that I need to fire you immediately to protect the firm's reputation and our clients' assets." My stomach dropped straight to the floor. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. "Mr. Henderson, I am so incredibly sorry. My family is going through a very toxic, highly unstable situation right now regarding a property I bought. I promise you, none of it is true." He held up a hand, stopping my frantic apology. He actually chuckled. "Relax, son. I know crazy when I hear it on the phone. I told her if she ever calls this firm again, I will have our corporate lawyers sue her into oblivion for defamation and tortious interference with a business contract. But you need to lock your life down, Julian. This is escalating. and these people are unhinged. He was absolutely right. It was escalating faster than I could process. The physical harassment started just a few days later. Knowing they were escalating, I immediately hired a professional crew to install a top-tier security system with high-definition, night vision cameras around the entire perimeter of my new property. It was the smartest money I ever spent in my life. Within a week, my phone was constantly buzzing with motion alerts. They started doing coordinated drive-bys at odd hours of the day and night. Sebastian would park his aging Porsche directly across the street from my driveway, roll down the tinted windows, and film TikToks pointing dramatically at my house. He captioned them with things like, "Just looking at the empire that should have been mine. Waiting for justice." My parents took a different approach. They would drive over in their sedan, park at the end of my driveway, and just sit there in the dark for 20 minutes at a time, staring silently at my front door. It was deliberate psychological intimidation. They wanted me to feel utterly unsafe and paranoid in my own sanctuary. The absolute worst betrayal, however, came from someone I always thought was a reasonable, level-headed adult. My Uncle Felix, my mother's older brother. He called me on a Sunday afternoon, smoothly playing the role of the wise, objective peacemaker. "Julian, my boy," Uncle Felix said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This whole situation is tearing your poor mother apart. Her blood pressure is through the roof. We need to find a mature compromise here." "There is no compromise to be found, Uncle Felix," I replied firmly, pacing my living room. "They are demanding I give them my house. The house I bought and paid for. Now listen to me," he continued, ignoring my boundaries completely. "You are doing very well for yourself. You have a great salary. Sebastian is clearly struggling. Why don't you just give him $100,000 for a down payment on his own place? Or just pay his rent for a few years? It is a small price to pay for peace in the family. If you do not do the right thing here, I am afraid nobody in this family will ever speak to you again." I stopped pacing. I realized right then that it was not just my parents who were toxic. The entire family tree was rotten to the core. They all viewed me as nothing more than a human ATM. Endless financial resource to be mined to subsidize Sebastian's lazy, entitled lifestyle so they didn't have to deal with him. "Uncle Felix," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, "you can tell my parents and the rest of the family that my bank is permanently closed. Do not ever call this number again." I hung up the phone and blocked his contact immediately. When the 47-page lawsuit finally hit my doorstep, I realized they were not just trying to bully me into submission. They were actively trying to use the justice system to rob me blind. They honestly, truly believed that because they were my biological parents, a judge would look at my financial success, look at Sebastian's failure, and force me to redistribute my wealth to my brother in the name of family values. I knew I needed heavy artillery. I called my best friend, Victor. Victor and I go way back to college, and he happens to be a ruthless, highly successful civil litigation attorney in the city. I sat in his corner office, overlooking the sweeping city skyline, and slid the massive lawsuit across his polished glass desk. Victor read through the documents in complete, unbroken silence for nearly 20 minutes. The only sound in the room was the ticking of his expensive wall clock and the sharp rustle of the thick paper. Finally, he took off his reading glasses, tossed them onto the desk, and rubbed the bridge of his nose in sheer disbelief. "Julian," Victor said, looking at me with a mixture of professional disgust and intense intrigue, "this is, without a doubt, the most legally frivolous, morally bankrupt piece of garbage I have ever read in my entire 10 years of practicing law. Claiming child-rearing expenses as a retroactive debt? Claiming a grown sibling has a legal right to your real estate simply because of the economic climate? Any judge with a pulse will throw this out before lunch." "I want to represent myself," I said, my voice hard and resolute. Victor raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his leather chair. "Pro se? Why would you do that? You can easily afford my retainer. I will absolutely tear them apart in court. Because if I hire you or any expensive lawyer, they will spin the narrative. They will claim I bullied them with high-priced legal teams. They will play the victim even harder, I explained, leaning over his desk. I know commercial real estate law. I know how to read contracts. I want to stand in that courtroom alone. I want to look them dead in the eye while I personally dismantle their entire reality. But I do need a massive favor from you. Name it, Victor said, crossing his arms. I need you to recommend the most vicious, relentless forensic accountant in the state. I want to follow their money. All of it. Every single hidden penny. If my family wanted to play a high-stakes game of financial exposure, I was going to flip the board completely upside down. I thought they were just greedy. I thought they were just entitled. I had absolutely no idea how deep their lies truly ran, and what I was about to find would change the trajectory of all our lives forever. The legal discovery process is a beautiful, terrifying thing. When you sue someone and demand their financial records to prove a claim, you inadvertently open up your own entire life to extreme legal scrutiny. By legally demanding my banking records to prove I bought the house with my own funds, my parents were legally forced to hand over their own financial records to prove they had a standing claim. I took Victor's recommendation and hired an independent forensic accountant. He charged me $500 an hour, and within the first week, I knew he was worth every single penny. We sat at the massive oak dining table in my new house, surrounded by towering boxes of bank statements, decade-old tax returns, and comprehensive credit reports that my parents' lawyer was legally compelled to hand over during discovery. For years, my parents had played the ultimate poverty card. They constantly claimed they were struggling. They claimed they could not afford to help me with my college textbooks, could not afford to pay for my wedding one day, could not afford basic home repairs. They aggressively used this fake poverty to justify why I needed to step up and give my house to Sebastian. The accountant, a quiet man named Arthur, slid a thick blue folder across the polished table. "Look at page 4, he said quietly, tapping the paper with his silver pen. I opened the blue folder. My eyes scanned the complex lines of numbers, and my blood ran ice cold in my veins. My parents were not broke. Not even close. They had over $200,000 sitting in liquid investment accounts and an incredibly robust 401k. They had been lying directly to my face and to the rest of our extended family for years. But that was not the twist that made my jaw drop. The real twist was highlighted in yellow on page 7. Look at the recurring outbound wire transfers from their primary checking account, Arthur pointed out. Every single month, on the first of the month, for the past 3 consecutive years, there was a wire transfer of exactly $2,500 from my parents' account directly into Sebastian's personal checking account. $90,000. They had secretly funneled $90,000 in untraceable cash to my brother while he lived rent-free in their basement, constantly complaining on the internet about how broke and oppressed he was. And the absolute best part? Because they labeled the transfers as business consulting on the bank memos, my parents were illegally trying to write it off on their taxes, and Sebastian had never reported a single dime of that 90 grand as taxable income to the IRS. It was pure, undeniable federal tax fraud. It gets worse, Arthur noted, sliding another document forward. They also recently took out a $50,000 home equity loan on their primary residence. They leveraged the house you grew up in just to fund this ridiculous lawsuit against you. I sat back in my chair, staring up at the high ceiling. The sheer, cold calculation of it all washed over me in waves. They were actively risking their own retirement, committing federal tax evasion, and destroying our family, just to coddle a 33-year-old man who absolutely refused to get a job. I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had burned away, leaving only a cold, hyper-focused clarity. I was going to build a bulletproof legal defense, and then I was going to drop a nuclear bomb on their entire existence. The tense weeks leading up to the trial were completely surreal. The winter holidays rolled around. Thanksgiving passed in absolute silence. Christmas arrived. Naturally, I was banned from the massive extended family gathering held at my aunt's house. I spent Christmas Eve sitting entirely alone in my massive, quiet house, eating takeout Chinese food from a cardboard box, meticulously organizing my mountain of evidence into categorized, color-coded legal binders. Suddenly, My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a rapid succession of text messages from my cousin Clara. Clara was always the quiet one in the family. A sharp, observant girl who watched everything and said very little. "Clara, are you awake? You need to see this right now. I am hiding in the upstairs bathroom at the Christmas party." She sent a large video file. I tapped play, the screen illuminating my dark kitchen. It was a recording she had taken discreetly from the hallway, looking directly into the crowded dining room. The whole family was sitting around the long table, eating turkey and drinking expensive wine. At the head of the table, commanding everyone's attention, Sebastian had unrolled massive blue architectural blueprints. They were the exact floor plans for my house. He had gone to the county clerk's office and pulled them from the public records. "So, once the judge signs the deed over to me next month," Sebastian was saying loudly, pointing at the paper, "I am going to bring in a crew to knock down this load-bearing wall between the kitchen and the living room. It will completely open up the space for my content studio. Mom is going to pay for the contractors out of her savings." Aunt Beatrice chimed in, raising her wine glass. "It is going to be gorgeous, honey. Finally, a creative space that reflects your true potential." Julian never appreciated aesthetics anyway. He never deserved it. I paused the video. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The absolute, unhinged delusion was staggering. He didn't even own the house. He was involved in a legally frivolous lawsuit that was about to blow up in his face, and he was already planning major structural demolition. Clara sent another text. "He has been buying furniture all week on credit cards. He says he is manifesting the legal win." I immediately pulled up Sebastian's public TikTok account on my laptop. Sure enough, there were 3 brand new videos posted that very day. In them, he was walking arrogantly through a high-end luxury furniture showroom, pointing at a $5,000 white leather sectional sofa and a massive imported marble dining table. "Shopping for the new estate." The caption read, complete with praying hand emojis. "Justice is coming soon." I downloaded every single video. I screen-recorded every single post and comment. I printed out the GoFundMe pages where he was fraudulently raising money for emergency legal defense, while clearly spending it on luxury furniture and expensive coffees. I spent the rest of that cold night finalizing my legal binders. Binder A: the deed, mortgage documents, and financial proof of purchase. Binder B: the forensic accounting of my parents' hidden assets and massive tax evasion. Binder C: the social media harassment, fraudulent crowdfunding, and trespassing evidence. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I sat by the large bay window in my living room, watching the snow fall heavily over my driveway. Suddenly, the security camera motion detector pinged loudly on my phone. I looked down at the glowing screen. A dark sedan was slowly rolling past my house at 2 a.m. It paused directly in front of my mailbox, sat there idling for 5 agonizing minutes, and then slowly drove away into the snowy night. They were trying to intimidate me. They thought I was still that scared, helpless kid trapped in the basement, desperate for their approval. I smiled in the darkness, sipping my cold coffee. The calm before the slaughter is a very real, very terrifying feeling. I had absolutely everything I needed. The trap was perfectly set, the jaws wide open. All I had to do was wait for them to walk right into the courtroom and spring it on themselves. The morning of the trial finally arrived, bringing with it a biting, bitter winter chill that seemed to seep directly into my bones. I woke up at 4 in the morning, my eyes snapping open in the pitch dark of my master bedroom. I did not feel fear. I did not feel anxiety. I felt a cold, calculated, and absolute resolve. This was the day I was going to surgically remove the toxic tumor that had been draining my life force for the past 31 years. I walked into my massive, custom-tiled master bathroom, turned the shower water as hot as I could stand it, and stood under the spray, letting the steam clear my head. I dressed with meticulous care. I chose my best tailored navy blue suit, a crisp white Oxford shirt, and a conservative burgundy silk tie. I wanted to look exactly like the successful, highly competent commercial real estate professional that I was. I wanted the judge to look at me and see a man who had built a solid, undeniable life. I walked downstairs to the kitchen island, poured a cup of black coffee, and reviewed my 3 massive, color-coded legal binders one last time. Binder A contained the indisputable proof of my home purchase. Binder B contained the explosive forensic accounting report detailing my parents' hidden 401k assets and their massive systemic tax fraud. Binder C contained the digital footprint of my brother's unhinged social media harassment, his fraudulent GoFundMe campaign, and the video of him planning structural demolition on a house he did not even own. I loaded the heavy leather briefcases into my car and drove toward the downtown county courthouse. The morning traffic was heavy, a sea of red taillights stretching out in front of me, but I navigated it with a strange sense of total inner peace. When I arrived at the courthouse, an imposing structure of gray granite and towering glass windows, I walked through the heavy security metal detectors. I took the crowded elevator up to the 4th floor, the Civil Litigation Division. The hallway was a chaotic mix of anxious people, pacing lawyers, and crying family members dealing with custody battles, divorce settlements, and bitter inheritance disputes. I found courtroom 4B, took a deep breath, and pushed through the heavy oak double doors. The courtroom smelled distinctly of old wood, floor wax, and nervous sweat. I walked straight down the center aisle and took my seat at the defendant's table on the right side of the room. I was entirely alone. I did not have a high-priced lawyer whispering strategies in my ear. I did not have a supportive family sitting in the gallery behind me. I just had myself, my truth, and my meticulously organized evidence. 10 minutes later, the heavy doors opened again, and the plaintiffs walked in. It was a completely coordinated, theatrical entrance. My father, Richard, and my mother, Margaret, walked in first. They were dressed in somber, dark clothing, deliberately projecting the image of heartbroken, desperate, and exhausted parents who had been forced into this terrible situation by a cruel son. My mother was actually clutching a lace handkerchief, dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes. Right behind them was Sebastian, the golden child. He was wearing a ridiculously tight, overly trendy designer suit that our parents had undoubtedly paid for with their secret cash reserves. He carried a thick manila folder, and as he sat down at the plaintiff's table, he immediately began spreading out his Pinterest printouts, paint color swatches, and fabric samples across the polished wood. He was treating the plaintiff's table like a consultation desk at a high-end interior design firm. He was so incredibly arrogant, so deeply insulated by my parents' lifelong enabling, that he honestly believed this trial was just a brief formality before he was handed the keys to my $850,000 real estate asset. My Aunt Beatrice walked in last, leading a small procession of 3 other distant relatives. They sat in the front row of the gallery, whispering loudly to each other and glaring daggers at the back of my head. They were the cheering section, ready to watch my public execution. Their attorney, a slick, overly tanned man named Gregory, who charged an astronomical hourly rate, stood up and aggressively buttoned his expensive suit jacket as the bailiff suddenly announced the arrival of the judge. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. "The Honorable Judge Harrison presiding." Judge Harrison emerged from her chambers and took her seat at the high bench. She was a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s, with sharp, calculating eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She carried an aura of absolute, unyielding authority. She had spent decades presiding over bitter family lawsuits, and you could tell just by looking at her that she had absolutely zero patience for frivolous legal theatrics. She opened the massive case file on her desk, let out a deep, heavy sigh, and looked directly down at Gregory. "Counselor Gregory," Judge Harrison said, her voice echoing sharply in the dead-quiet room, "I spent my evening reviewing your initial filings. I strongly suggest you use your opening remarks to explain to this court exactly why you are wasting precious taxpayer time with a lawsuit demanding a grown, independent man hand over his legally purchased real estate to his adult brother based on," and I quote from page 12 of your brief, "the current economic climate negatively affecting social media entrepreneurs." Gregory cleared his throat loudly, gripping the edges of his podium, trying his hardest to project total legal confidence. "Good morning, Your Honor. My clients, Richard and Margaret, are loving, fiercely devoted parents who made massive, decades-long financial and emotional investments in the defendant's upbringing. They sacrificed their own financial stability, their own retirement security, to ensure his corporate success. We are simply arguing that the defendant, who now enjoys a massive corporate salary and holds substantial real estate assets, has a binding moral and implied legal obligation to support the foundational family unit. His older brother, Sebastian, is currently economically disadvantaged through no fault of his own. We are asking the court for a simple, equitable transfer of the property deed, along with a temporary 36-month mortgage payment mandate, to balance the scales of family equity. Judge Harrison stared at him. She did not blink. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her steepled hands. "Are you standing in my courtroom, counselor, looking me in the eye, and arguing that the basic, legally required expenses of raising a minor child somehow create a retroactive financial lien on that adult child's future private property?" "We are arguing the principle of family equity, Your Honor." Gregory deflected smoothly, clearly used to dancing around hostile judges. The defendant explicitly used the strong work ethic, the shelter, and the foundational resources provided by his parents to acquire this specific property. Therefore, the family as a whole holds a rightful, equitable stake in the asset. That is certainly a highly creative, albeit legally fictitious, interpretation of property law, Judge Harrison replied, her voice dripping with dry sarcasm. She turned her sharp gaze to me. "Mr. Defendant, I see you do not have counsel present. You are proceeding pro se. You have the floor. What is your response to these extraordinary claims?" I stood up slowly. I didn't shake. I didn't sweat. I felt a cold, absolute calm wash over my entire body. The moment I had been preparing for my entire life was finally here. "Your Honor," I began, my voice clear, steady, and echoing perfectly across the room. "I am the sole, exclusive legal owner of the property located in Riverside Heights. I purchased this home completely independently, utilizing a 2.8% fixed-rate mortgage and a cash down payment of exactly $170,000, which I saved from my own salary. I have provided the court within Binder A with full unredacted bank statements, the original property deed, and the complete mortgage origination documents. Not a single penny of the purchase price came from the plaintiffs. There is no shared family equity. There is no implied verbal or written contract. This lawsuit is nothing more than a predatory, malicious attempt to legally steal my acquired assets to subsidize my brother's refusal to maintain employment." Judge Harrison nodded slowly, flipping through the thick file on her desk. "I see the financial documents clearly, Julian. Counselor Gregory, do you formally dispute the origin of the direct funds used to purchase the home?" Gregory shifted uncomfortably, looking back at my parents. "We do not dispute the origin of the direct down payment funds, Your Honor. However, we argue that the underlying financial dynamics of the family structure." I knew exactly what he was going to say. I was ready. This was the moment I opened the trapdoor. "Stop right there," I interrupted loudly, my voice cutting through the courtroom. I reached down and confidently opened Binder B. The heavy metal rings clicked open with a satisfying snap. The real battle was about to begin, and they were completely unarmed. "Your Honor," I continued, holding up the thick stack of papers from Binder B. "If the plaintiffs wish to discuss the underlying financial dynamics of this family, I am more than happy to oblige this court." In their initial filing, the plaintiffs claimed severe, crippling financial hardship to justify this extreme, forced asset redistribution. They claim they sacrificed their retirement. During the mandatory legal discovery process, I hired a highly credentialed, certified forensic accountant to extensively review the financial disclosures provided by the plaintiffs. My parents suddenly sat up very straight. The fake, sorrowful expressions vanished from their faces, replaced by genuine, unadulterated panic. Sebastian finally stopped looking at his imported Italian paint swatches and stared at me. Gregory, the expensive lawyer, frowned deeply, looking genuinely confused. It became immediately glaringly obvious that my parents had lied directly to their own attorney about the true state of their finances. "I formally submit Exhibit B for the official court record," I stated loudly, handing the copies to the bailiff, who walked them up to the judge's bench. "These documents represent the plaintiff's complete, unredacted asset portfolios. My parents are currently sitting on over $200,000 in highly liquid investments and a fully funded, robust 401k retirement account. They are not destitute. They are not struggling. Furthermore, the banking records explicitly show that for the past 36 consecutive months, they have secretly wired exactly $2,500 a month into the personal checking account of my brother, Sebastian." The courtroom went completely, horrifyingly silent. You could literally hear the hum of the HVAC system in the ceiling. "That is exactly $90,000 in undisclosed, untaxed cash gifts, Your Honor," I continued, pressing my foot down on the gas pedal. "They actively categorized these monthly transfers as business consulting fees on their banking memos to illegally write them off on their taxes, while my brother publicly and aggressively claims poverty on the internet. Furthermore, the records show they recently extracted a $50,000 home equity loan against their primary residence, presumably to fund this frivolous, malicious lawsuit against me." Judge Harrison's eyes narrowed dangerously. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. She looked at my parents with absolute disgust, then turned her furious gaze to their lawyer. "Counselor Gregory, did you intentionally allow your clients to submit sworn, legally binding affidavits to this court claiming severe financial hardship while they were sitting on $250,000 in assets and secretly funneling $90,000 in untaxed income to the adult brother?" Gregory turned the color of ash. He gripped the podium, looking at my father, sheer panic flashing in his eyes. "Your Honor, I absolutely assure you, I was not fully aware of the extent of the liquid assets or the recurring monthly transfers," my clients assured me. "It gets significantly worse, Your Honor," I interrupted again, unrelenting. I did not want to give them a single second to breathe. I opened Binder C. "The plaintiffs claim my brother needs my specific house for his mental well-being because he is an oppressed, struggling creative entrepreneur. I submit Exhibit C. These are timestamp screenshots, downloaded videos, and social media posts from Sebastian's public accounts, all posted within the last month. While this lawsuit was pending, he launched a highly fraudulent GoFundMe campaign claiming he was facing imminent homelessness to solicit donations from the public. He then immediately used those fraudulently obtained funds to purchase luxury furniture on credit cards, explicitly for the house he does not own. I have also provided a video of him at a family Thanksgiving dinner, explicitly stating his detailed plans to demolish load-bearing walls in my property the moment he wins this case." I handed the final stack of copies to the bailiff. Judge Harrison put on her wire-rimmed reading glasses. She looked at the color screenshots of the GoFundMe page. She read the transcripts of the TikTok videos where he cried about his stolen empire. She took off her glasses, folded them carefully, and let them drop onto her heavy oak desk with a sharp, echoing clack. "This is an absolute, unmitigated disgrace to the judicial system," Judge Harrison said, her voice vibrating with barely contained, righteous fury. She looked directly down from her bench at my parents. "You have attempted to weaponize this court to facilitate a blatant, malicious property theft. You have deliberately lied about your financial status on sworn documents. You have enabled a grown man's absolute, staggering delusion. You have wasted this court's valuable time, taxpayer resources, and you have subjected your youngest son to an unrelenting campaign of harassment." She picked up her wooden gavel and banged it so hard the sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. "This case is dismissed with extreme prejudice. I am ruling entirely in favor of the defendant, Julian. Furthermore, considering the egregious, frivolous, and highly harassing nature of this lawsuit, I am ordering the plaintiffs to pay the defendant's full legal consulting costs, the entire forensic accounting fees, and all associated court costs. Do not ever bring this garbage into my courtroom again. We are adjourned." Sebastian literally dropped his manila folder. The expensive paint swatches and fabric samples scattered across the courtroom floor like confetti. My mother let out a loud, dramatic, theatrical gasp, covering her mouth as if she had just witnessed a horrific car crash. My father turned bright, aggressive red, staring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I calmly closed my binders, packed them meticulously into my leather briefcases, snapped the locks shut, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. But the real show did not happen inside the courtroom. It happened on the wide concrete steps of the courthouse immediately afterward. As I walked out into the cold morning air, I heard the screaming before I even reached the parking lot. Sebastian was having a full-blown, catastrophic meltdown on the public sidewalk. He was aggressively waving his arms, yelling at his highly paid lawyer, demanding to know how the judge could possibly misunderstand his creative vision and his fundamental rights. He was actually sobbing, large, ugly tears rolling down his face, screaming about how his future was stolen and his life was completely ruined. My Aunt Beatrice was completely unhinged. She was pacing back and forth on the steps, aggressively confronting random strangers who were just trying to enter the building for traffic court, screaming about the corrupt, rigged legal system and how family values were completely dead in America. Court security officers actually had to step outside, place their hands on their duty belts, and threaten her with immediate arrest for disturbing the peace before she finally backed down. The most poetic justice of the entire morning happened right as I was unlocking my car door. A group of local college girls happened to be walking past the courthouse on their way to a coffee shop. One of them stopped, pointed directly at Sebastian, and loudly said, "Oh my God, isn't that the total loser from TikTok who expects his brother to just hand over an entire luxury house?" They pulled out their smartphones and started recording his pathetic tantrum. Sebastian realized he was being filmed in real life, completely outside of his controlled basement studio with his flattering ring lights, and he started screaming at them to stop. It only made them laugh harder. I got into my car, turned on the heater, and drove away. The victory felt incredibly satisfying, but deep down, a cold, nagging instinct told me this was not over. Toxic people do not experience a magical moment of clarity just because a federal judge tells them they are legally wrong. They simply double down on their delusions. I was absolutely right. The harassment was relentless over the next few weeks, but the absolute final straw, the moment that triggered my ultimate nuclear option, happened 3 weeks after the trial. I was working late at my real estate office, reviewing a complex commercial lease, when I got an urgent, high-priority alert from my premium credit monitoring service on my phone. It was a hard inquiry notification. Someone had just attempted to open a massive personal loan and a secondary mortgage application. They used my exact legal name, my date of birth, and my social security number. I logged into the portal immediately. The application originated from an IP address directly tied to my parents' zip code. The mailing address listed on the fraudulent loan application was my parents' house. I sat back in my leather office chair, staring blindly at the computer screen. Sebastian, in his desperate, unhinged pursuit to get the money to buy a house that matched mine, he had crossed the line from civil harassment directly into federal felony territory. He had stolen my identity. They thought I would just call the local police, make a standard property report, and let them get away with a slap on the wrist because we shared DNA. They thought family ties would protect them from the ultimate consequences. They severely underestimated my capacity for retaliation. I picked up my phone and called Victor. The real war was about to begin. "Victor," I said into the phone, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, cold as absolute zero. "Remember those financial records we pulled during the civil discovery phase? The $90,000 in undeclared income? The GoFundMe wire fraud evidence?" "Yes, of course," Victor replied carefully, instantly recognizing the dangerous tone in my voice. "What happened, Julian?" "Sebastian just tried to take out a secondary mortgage and a massive personal loan using my social security number. I have the IP address and the hard inquiry timestamps. I am completely done playing defense in civil court. I want to burn their entire kingdom to the absolute ground. How do we package this specifically for the federal government?" Victor actually laughed over the phone, a dark, extremely satisfied, predatory sound. "Oh, Julian, You have absolutely no idea what you are about to unleash upon these people. The Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation do not play family court games. They do not care about your mother's tears. Bring me the binders tomorrow morning. For the next entire week, I worked in absolute, unrelenting silence. I did not engage with their ongoing social media posts. I did not answer the frantic, angry phone calls from Aunt Beatrice or the other flying monkeys. I meticulously compiled a massive, irrefutable, completely bulletproof federal dossier. I documented the 3 years of $2,500 monthly transfers, explicitly highlighting my parents' documented attempt to write it off as business expenses on their tax returns, and Sebastian's complete failure to report the income. I documented the $50,000 home equity loan they took out under highly questionable circumstances. I compiled every single screenshot, video transcript, and financial record of Sebastian's GoFundMe campaign. Crowdfunding fraud, when the money crosses state lines electronically, automatically constitutes federal wire fraud. Finally, I compiled the hard evidence from the major credit bureaus showing the exact timestamp, the IP address, and the fraudulent application details of the identity theft attempt. I printed absolutely everything out on heavy-duty paper, placed the massive stacks of documents into thick priority mail envelopes, and sent them via certified, return receipt mail to the Internal Revenue Service's Criminal Investigation Division, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Unit, the State Attorney General's Office, and the elite fraud departments of all 3 major credit bureaus. I also sent complete, undeniable evidence packets directly to the trust and safety legal teams at TikTok, Instagram, and GoFundMe, detailing the exact nature of his financial scams, his fake identity, and his relentless harassment campaigns. Then, I sat back in my beautiful, quiet, perfectly safe house, poured myself a glass of expensive aged bourbon, and waited for the dominoes to finally fall. When you invite the federal government into your personal life, they do not move quickly. They are a massive bureaucracy, but when they finally do move, they move with the devastating, unstoppable, crushing force of a runaway freight train. The very first domino to fall was his precious social media presence. Within 5 business days of receiving my packet, GoFundMe's legal team permanently banned Sebastian's account. They completely froze the funds he had illegally raised and initiated automatic, mandatory refunds to every single donor, sending out an automated email citing fraudulent campaign activity. TikTok and Instagram followed suit shortly after. They permanently wiped his accounts for repeatedly violating community guidelines regarding targeted harassment and financial scams. His entire digital identity, the personal brand he claimed was so incredibly valuable and essential to his mental health, vanished into thin air overnight. He had absolutely zero platform left to complain on. He was digitally erased. But the real devastation, the true, inescapable nuclear fallout, arrived a few weeks later in the form of thick certified letters from the United States government. 3 months after I dropped the dossiers in the mail, my parents received a terrifying, formal notice from the IRS. It was not just a simple tax bill or a request for a minor clarification. It was a formal notice of a full, comprehensive, deeply invasive forensic audit spanning the last 5 years of their entire financial lives. The IRS auditors demanded immediate, documented answers regarding the $90,000 in undocumented transfers, the fraudulent business expense deductions, and the exact nature of their home equity loan. A few days later, Sebastian received his own certified letter. The IRS wanted to discuss his complete failure to report a single dime of the $90,000 as taxable income. But the IRS was actually the absolute least of his mounting problems. On a quiet, sunny Tuesday morning, 2 special agents from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit knocked loudly on the front door of my parents' suburban house. They were not wearing windbreakers. They were wearing sharp suits, and they were not there for a friendly chat. They were there to formally interview Sebastian regarding multiple federal counts of interstate wire fraud associated with his crowdfunding campaigns and felony identity theft regarding the fraudulent mortgage applications utilizing my Social Security number. My cousin Clara called me that afternoon, whispering frantically into the phone from her workplace bathroom. The small-town family gossip network had completely exploded. Everyone on my parents' street had seen the dark federal vehicles parked in their driveway. The neighbors were talking. The immediate financial fallout for my parents was catastrophic. They had to hire actual, high-powered criminal defense attorneys to keep their son out of federal prison, not just civil lawyers to fight over a house. The retainers for federal criminal defense lawyers start at $20,000 just to open the file, and the hourly rates climb rapidly from there. Because the IRS had essentially frozen their ability to leverage any of their remaining assets or take out new loans, the massive amounts of cash had to come from somewhere else. I heard through Clara that they were forced to completely liquidate their retirement accounts, taking massive early withdrawal penalties that decimated their future security. They had to sell my father's prized fishing boat at a massive loss to a neighbor. And the crowning jewel of the disaster? The aging silver Porsche. The luxury car that started this entire cascade of resentment and entitlement 15 years ago. It was repossessed and sold at a local police auction to help cover Sebastian's mounting legal fees. He was now a 33-year-old man, facing federal indictment, with absolutely no job, no car, no money, and no social media presence to validate his existence. The collateral damage extended rapidly to the flying monkeys as well. My Aunt Beatrice, the miserable woman who had tormented my employer, faced her own brutal reckoning. Someone, perhaps an anonymous concerned citizen who looked remarkably like me, forwarded her extensive, unhinged public Facebook rants and her highly documented harassment campaign directly to the Human Resources Department of the local hospital, where she worked as an administrative director. The hospital board reviewed the evidence and decided her highly toxic public behavior and willingness to harass innocent businesses reflected poorly on their corporate values. She was terminated immediately, escorted out of the building by security, losing her pension and her health insurance in one single afternoon. The family dynamic entirely, irreversibly shattered. When the sheer scale of the financial ruin and the federal charges became undeniable, the extended family finally stopped defending my parents. The illusion of the perfect, loving family was broken permanently. My grandmother Sylvia, a tough, pragmatic woman in her 80s who usually stayed completely out of family drama, finally picked up the phone and called me. "Julian," she said, her voice crackling over the line, sounding exhausted but firm. "I just got off the phone with your father. He is begging me for a massive loan to save their house from foreclosure because the legal bills are drowning them." "Are you going to give the money to him, Grandma?" I asked quietly, staring out my window. "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "I told Richard that he made his bed by worshipping that lazy, entitled boy, and now he can sleep in it. I am taking him out of my will entirely. The money will go to charity. I just wanted to call and tell you that I am incredibly proud of you, Julian. You stood up to vicious bullies, even when they shared your own blood. You protected your own house and your own future. It was the very first time anyone in my family had ever expressed genuine, unprompted pride in me. It brought hot tears to my eyes, but they were tears of profound relief and vindication. The relentless, crushing stress of the federal investigations, the mounting legal debt, and the public humiliation in their neighborhood finally broke my parents' marriage. They stopped presenting a united front and started viciously, constantly turning on each other. My father blamed my mother for coddling Sebastian his entire life and creating a monster. My mother blamed my father for not managing the family finances better and for allowing the audit to happen. And they both finally, entirely too late, turned their immense, boiling rage onto Sebastian. They realized that in their blind, desperate attempt to protect the golden child, they had completely destroyed their own future. But the ultimate closure, the final conversation that permanently severed my ties to them, was yet to come. 6 months after the civil trial concluded, my cell phone rang late on a Thursday evening. I was sitting on my expensive living room sofa, watching a movie with my fiancée, Diana. I looked down at the glowing screen. It was my father's number. I hadn't spoken a single word to him since I walked out of the courtroom. Part of me wanted to just hit the red decline button, block the number forever, and go back to my peaceful life. But a deeper, more resolute part of me knew I needed to look them in the eye one last time. I needed to deliver the final verdict. I answered the call. Julian. My father's voice was completely broken. It didn't sound like the arrogant middle manager who demanded I hand over my house. It sounded hollow, raspy, like a man who had lost absolutely everything and had been crying for days. Son, we need to talk. Can you please come over? Please. It's an emergency. I drove across town. I did not pull up to the comfortable, tree-lined suburban house I grew up in. That house was gone, lost to the massive legal debts, the IRS tax liens, and eventual foreclosure. I pulled my car into the cracked, weed-infested asphalt parking lot of a cheap, run-down apartment complex on the absolute edge of the city limits. I walked up the dirty concrete stairs to the second floor and knocked firmly on the peeling wooden door. My father opened it. He looked like he had aged 20 years in 6 months. His shoulders were slumped. His hair was entirely gray and thinning, and his eyes were dark, hollow pits. I stepped into the cramped, poorly lit, depressing apartment. The air smelled of cheap cooking oil and despair. They had been forced to sell most of their quality furniture just to make the monthly rent and pay the lawyers. There was a cheap, wobbly folding table in the small kitchen area. Sitting at that table, completely surrounded by towering stacks of federal legal documents, indictment papers, and IRS penalty notices, was Sebastian. He looked entirely defeated. The arrogant, entitled influencer persona was completely gone, replaced by a terrified, pale man-child staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. My mother was sitting on a faded, stained love seat in the corner, clutching a damp tissue, her eyes red, swollen, and utterly hopeless. "What do you want?" I asked, remaining standing near the door, refusing to step further into their misery. My father cleared his throat, staring down at the cheap linoleum floor, unable to meet my gaze. "The FBI. They concluded their investigation into Sebastian. The United States Attorney's Office is officially recommending criminal charges. Wire fraud for the GoFundMe. Identity theft for the mortgage applications. The IRS is finalizing the tax evasion charges." He swallowed hard, a painful sound in the quiet room. "He is looking at 18 months to 3 years in a federal penitentiary." Sebastian buried his face in his trembling hands and started sobbing loudly, a pathetic, high-pitched wail. "I am so sorry, Julian," he choked out, gasping for air. "I never meant for it to go this far. I was just desperate. I just wanted what you had. The lawyers. They said if you talk to the federal prosecutor, if you submit a formal victim impact statement asking for extreme leniency and stating you forgive me, they might reduce the sentence to probation. Please, you are my brother. We share the same blood. Please save me." My mother looked up at me, fresh tears streaming down her ruined face. "Julian, please. I am begging you on my hands and knees. We have lost the house. We have lost our entire retirement savings. Your father's heart is failing from the stress. He is on 3 different blood pressure medications. We have nothing left. Please do not let your brother go to a federal prison. He won't survive it. I will do anything. We will get jobs at Walmart. We will pay you back every single penny we have ever owed you for the rest of our lives. Just please write the letter." I looked at the 3 of them. I looked at the people who had treated me like a secondary citizen, a burden, my entire childhood. I looked at the parents who tried to legally steal the roof over my head just to satisfy their own twisted favoritism. I looked at the brother who tried to steal my identity and ruin my credit to enrich himself. They weren't sorry for what they did to me. They were only sorry that they got caught, and they were utterly terrified of the consequences. "Pay me back with what money?" I asked, my voice completely flat, cold, and devoid of a single ounce of sympathy. "You are broke. You are bankrupt. You chose this path." I walked a few steps further into the room, commanding the space, making sure they all heard every single word I was about to say. "Do you want to know the ultimate, tragic irony here?" I asked, looking directly into my father's hollow eyes. "If you had just been proud of me when I bought that house, if you had just come over, shook my hand, and celebrated my hard work instead of trying to steal it, we would still be a family right now. I would have gladly hosted Thanksgiving dinners. I would have helped take care of you in your old age when you needed it. But you couldn't do it. I turned my cold gaze to my mother, who flinched. You chose greed over unconditional love. You chose your massive sense of entitlement over having a relationship with your youngest son. You constantly fed Sebastian's absolute delusion instead of forcing him to face reality and get a job. Finally, I looked at Sebastian, who was trembling violently at the folding table. You made your choices, Sebastian. You wanted to play high-stakes games with federal laws because you thought the rules didn't apply to you. Now you get to live with the adult consequences. I am not writing a letter. I am not speaking to the federal prosecutor. I hope they give you the maximum sentence. I am completely and permanently done with all of you. My mother let out a harrowing wail of absolute despair, but I didn't stay to listen to it. I turned around, walked out the door, and closed it firmly behind me, severing the tie forever. I walked down the concrete stairs, got into my car, and drove back to my own home, leaving them in the hell they created. In the end, the justice system worked exactly as it should. Sebastian was officially sentenced to 18 months in a federal prison, followed by 3 years of heavily monitored probation. He was legally ordered to pay full restitution to every single person he defrauded on GoFundMe, meaning his wages will be garnished for the rest of his life once he gets out. My parents are still living in that cramped, depressing apartment. My father suffered a minor heart attack shortly after the sentencing, and while his insurance covered most of the immediate medical bills, the stress of their financial ruin is slowly eating them alive. My Aunt Beatrice is still unemployed, forced to work minimum-wage retail cash register jobs because her professional reputation in healthcare administration is completely, irreparably destroyed. And as for me, I am sitting on the back patio of the beautiful 4-bedroom house that I bought with my own hard-earned salary. The mortgage is paid on time every single month. I recently got a massive promotion at my commercial real estate firm, stepping into a senior partner role. I am happily engaged to Diana, the most incredibly supportive and brilliant woman I have ever met, and we are planning a beautiful spring wedding in the botanical gardens, surrounded only by people who truly love us. I finally have a family that I chose, a family built on mutual respect, hard work, and actual love, not entitlement, manipulation, and theft. Sometimes, the only way to truly heal from a toxic family is to completely amputate the infection and walk away, allowing them to destroy themselves with their own poison. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Navigating family toxicity is one of the hardest things a person can ever do, and sometimes establishing firm, unbreakable boundaries is the absolute only way to save your own life. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to walk away from people who shared your blood because they refused to respect your boundaries? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Stay strong and always protect what you have built.